All right, lung cancers. These are cancers that affect the tissue of the lungs. You guessed it. Most of the time, these cancers are going to arise from the tissues of the bronchus and are diverting or branching tissues down here, clear down to the alveoli. And almost exclusively, it's associated with the epithelial cells. So if you remember, epithelium have like this basement membrane. Let's say we were taking a magnification of like right here and blowing it up, kind of at the junction between the bronchi, the terminal bronchi, and the alveolar cells. So we got this basement membrane here, and then we've got cuboidal-like cells, columnar cells, as we make our way down. And then interspersed in there, we're going to have some like mucus-secreting cells, goblet cells. And something we didn't really mention it in A and P, but also throughout this, there are special neuroendocrine cells. I'm going to do NE for neuroendocrine cells. These are cells that help to secrete different hormones that help to regulate just bronchodiameter and vasoconstriction and all of those things. Just little endocrine cells that are associated down here. And then towards the end, once we get closer to the alveoli, maybe we start to see squamous cells, these flat cells, where gas exchange starts to take place, but still basement membrane right there. All right, I'm going to jump to the next slide, but we're going to come back to here to look at these different cell types. The majority of cancers in the lungs result from just environmental damage. A lot of things like smoking. Smoking is probably the number one cause for lung cancers. And then industrial exposure, things like radon gas. Radon gas is a byproduct of uranium breakdown. It's a radioactive gas. It's kind of damaging. Asbestos. Other things, chest x-rays. That's ionizing radiation that can destroy DNA as it goes through. Anything else here? That's probably good. That's a lot of stuff. All right, so smoking and all these exposure things, repeated exposure, repeated damage to the tissues can lead to, again, those cancers forming. You damage the DNA, you cause some sort of proliferation, and then you get maybe the metastasis of that. Most of these are going to be associated with the epithelial that line the bronchi, bronchioles, and alveoli, these different cells up here. And because they come from different cells, we're going to classify them with different cell types down here. The four most common types that your book likes to break this into: adenocarcinomas. These come from adeno, meaning the glandular. So that's going to be these goblet cells. And we'll just add it here, adenocarcinoma. Are small cell carcinomas and squamous cells. Squamous cells come from these squamous cells. Squamous from the alveoli. Small cell carcinomas come from these neuroendocrine cells. Small cell carcinoma. And then large cell carcinomas are kind of hard to distinguish. Large cell carcinomas are, we don't think that they come from goblet cells, and we don't think that they come from the endocrine cells, so probably the rest of these cells. It's just really hard to tell what they do because their shape is so weird. So we'll say these are large cell carcinomas. Some of these are more or less associated with smoking than not. We see lots of smoking related in small cell carcinomas, but adenocarcinoma is also associated. Large cell carcinomas are slightly more associated. Squamous cells, slightly associated. So along most of these, smoking doesn't do a good thing to them, but the development of these carcinomas are going to be with just repeated exposure to chemicals or to something that's causing damage. Okay, clinical manifestations. Persistent cough. If you've got a growth or a mass that's taking up space in the areas, in the air conducting tubes, it's going to be easy to have fluids pooling around them. The ciliary elevators aren't going to work well, so there's going to be irritation that leads to coughing. Some of that coughing is going to produce blood in it, so our hemoptysis. Chest pain will be associated with that too. As those cells grow and take up more space, they're going to press against nerves. They're going to stimulate inflammation, which also leads to increased pain. Shortness of breath because we're blocking the airways. Different lung cancers are going to require different diagnostic tests, but in general, too, just looking at, again, physical examination, history, coughing up blood to have those common symptoms. You can take a bronchioscope, insert it down, make your way down to the bronchi, take a biopsy, and then determine cytologically whether you have differentiation or not in those cell types. Chest x-rays can also be used to look for growths or lumps, just neoplasms in that area, complete blood cell count, and our tissue biopsy, which we already talked about with the bronchoscope. Treatments also vary with the tumor type. Small cell carcinomas usually require chemotherapies. Chemotherapy, again, just a noxious sort of chemical that destroys rapidly dividing cells, the common thing there. Non-small cell carcinomas, things that aren't small cells, so the adenocarcinomas, the large cell carcinomas, and squamous cell carcinomas. If they're large enough, great, we can pull them out with surgery if possible. Sometimes you might need to remove a large chunk of the lung or an entire lung, and then just sew it up. Radiation, if possible, if surgery isn't feasible. Radiation treatments, this would be kind of like this. You'd have a radiation source that would be targeted toward a specific body part. Let's say the cancer is right there in her lung. This thing would shoot at it and then rotate around, shooting at it from all different angles, so that at the center focus is the cancer. So you hit that all the time, but you're only hitting the surrounding tissues a part of the time, which hopefully won't induce cancer or DNA damage in those cells either. So again, we're trying to remove as much of the tissue as possible, taking out a lot of the margins too, so that any of the small stuff that you don't really see also gets taken away. So some of the healthy tissue is going to have to come out too. Then you're going to do maybe chemotherapy, radiation to get rid of the rest of it too, if possible.